A racist cop arrests a pregnant woman for a minor traffic stop, believing she's just another nobody. But moments later, the truth rocks his world. She's a powerful judge who holds his career and his future in her hands. As his life spirals out of control, her fight for justice ignites a movement. How will this explosive encounter transform both their lives? And what happens when a shocking twist puts everything they've built at risk? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The autumn sun hung low in the New Haven sky, casting long shadows across the peaceful suburban street. Dr. Mia Bennett adjusted the air conditioning in her silver sedan, one hand resting briefly on her swollen belly. At 7 months pregnant, even the simplest tasks required extra effort these days. The radio hummed softly in the background, playing gentle jazz that matched the peaceful mood of the late afternoon. Mia smiled, thinking back to the cases she'd presided over that day. It had been a productive session in court, and now she could focus on something even more important: her baby's health checkup. Her soft blue blouse rustled as she shifted in her seat, trying to find a comfortable position. The weight of her pregnancy made long days in court more challenging, but Mia wouldn't have it any other way. She loved her work as a judge, and soon she would love being a mother too. "Just a few more blocks," she whispered, gently patting her belly. The baby had been active all day, as if sharing her anticipation for the appointment. Approaching a four-way intersection, Mia came to a complete stop at the sign. She checked both ways, then eased forward. The intersection was clear, with only a young black couple sitting in their parked car across the street. They seemed absorbed in conversation, barely noticing her pass by. The flash of red and blue lights in her rearview mirror startled her. Mia's heart skipped a beat as she carefully pulled over to the curb, her hands trembling slightly as she positioned them at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel. Through her side mirror, she watched Officer Frank Daniels approach. His steps were measured, deliberate, his uniform pressed to perfection. The late afternoon sun glinted off his badge as he reached her window. "License and registration," he demanded, his voice carrying an edge that made Mia's skin prickle. "Of course, officer," Mia replied calmly, reaching for her documents. "May I ask why I'm being pulled over?" Officer Daniels' face hardened. "You ran that stop sign back there." "I'm sorry, but I'm certain I came to a complete stop," Mia said, keeping her voice steady despite her rising anxiety. "I'm actually on my way to a prenatal appointment." "Ma'am, I'm not interested in excuses," Frank cut her off, his tone dripping with condescension. "I saw what I saw." Mia felt her professional composure starting to crack. "Officer Daniels, I respectfully disagree. I stopped completely at that sign." Frank's expression darkened. "Listen here. If you're going to be making irresponsible choices, at least own up to them." The comment stung. Mia reached for her phone, her hands shaking slightly as she started recording. "I'm going to document this interaction, officer." "Put that phone down," Frank barked, his hand moving to his belt. "That's an order." "I have the right to record this encounter," Mia stated firmly, though her heart was racing. "Step out of the vehicle," Frank demanded, already reaching for his handcuffs. "You're resisting an officer." Across the street, Sarah and James Carter watched in horror, quickly pulling out their own phones to record the scene. Mia struggled to maintain her composure as Frank roughly pulled her from the car, the handcuffs cold against her wrists. "Please," she said, her voice cracking. "I'm 7 months pregnant. This isn't necessary." But Frank wasn't listening. He led her toward his patrol car, past the growing number of silent onlookers, their phones raised like silent witnesses, to the unfolding scene. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead in the precinct, casting a harsh, unflattering glow across the institutional beige walls. Mia sat rigidly in the hard plastic chair, her back straight despite the growing discomfort in her lower spine. Around her, officers moved about their business, some casting sideways glances, while others pointedly ignored her presence. Officer Frank Daniels stood at the processing desk, his movements mechanical as he prepared the fingerprinting equipment. "Right hand first," he commanded, not meeting her eyes. Mia's hand trembled slightly as she pressed each finger onto the ink pad, then onto the crisp white card. The black ink felt cold and sticky against her skin. "Left hand," Frank barked, his tone clipped and professional, but with an undercurrent of smugness that made Mia's stomach churn. From across the room, Officer Bradley Carter leaned against a filing cabinet, arms crossed. "Maybe next time she'll think twice about that attitude," he said loudly enough for Mia to hear, earning a few chuckles from nearby officers. Mia took slow, deep breaths, focusing on staying calm for her baby's sake. Her wrists still ached from the handcuffs, and her shoulders felt tight with tension. She could feel her pulse throbbing in her temples as Frank roughly guided her hand to the fingerprint card. "Judge Bennett?" A sharp, authoritative voice cut through the precinct's ambient noise. Captain Amanda Reynolds stood in the doorway, her gray-streaked hair pulled back in a neat bun, her expression a mix of concern and confusion. Frank's hands froze mid-motion. Mia looked up, relief washing over her face. "Captain Reynolds," she said steadily, despite her racing heart. "I was just explaining to Officer Daniels about Terry vs. Ohio and the requirements for reasonable suspicion in traffic stops." Captain Reynolds' eyes narrowed as she approached the processing desk. "Officer Daniels, explain yourself. Why is a Superior Court judge being processed in my precinct?" Frank's face reddened. "She ran a stop sign and became confrontational during the stop, Captain. She was recording with her phone and refused to—" "Martin v. Rollins clearly establishes the First Amendment right to record police officers in public," Mia interrupted calmly, though her hands were still shaking. "As does your own department's policy manual, Section 4.21. Captain Reynolds' jaw tightened. "Release Judge Bennett immediately," she ordered, her voice cutting through the now silent precinct. "Officer Daniels, you're suspended pending a full investigation. Turn in your badge and gun before you leave." Bradley pushed himself off the filing cabinet, his face darkening. "Captain, you can't just—" "That's enough, Officer Carter," Captain Reynolds snapped. "Unless you'd like to join him." Mia gathered her belongings with trembling hands, careful to maintain her composure as she walked toward the exit. She could feel Frank's eyes boring into her back, could hear the whispers of other officers. But she kept her head high, her steps measured and dignified. It wasn't until she pushed through the heavy glass doors into the cool evening air that her carefully constructed facade began to crack. Tears welled in her eyes as she fumbled with her phone, typing out a quick message to David. "Coming home now. We need to talk." Sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows of Mia's colonial-style home, creating warm patches on the hardwood floor. She sat at her oak kitchen table, wrapped in her favorite soft gray cardigan, her hands cupped around a steaming mug of chamomile tea. Her phone screen glowed as she scrolled through an endless stream of notifications. "This can't be happening," Mia whispered, watching the shaky footage of her arrest for the third time. The video, captured by Sarah and James Carter, showed her calm demeanor dissolving into distress as Officer Frank handcuffed her. The counter showed over 100,000 views and climbing. David's warm hand squeezed her shoulder. "You need to rest, honey. Think about the baby." "I can't just ignore this," Mia replied, her voice tight. She clicked on a news segment where a polished anchor was already discussing the incident. An African-American judge, who is 7 months pregnant, was arrested yesterday, during a routine traffic stop in New Haven. The hashtag #WhyJusticeForJudgeBennett trended across social media platforms. Comments flooded in from across the country. "This is outrageous. How dare they treat a pregnant woman like this? Even judges aren't safe." David pulled up a chair beside her, his architect's sketchbook forgotten on the counter. "Whatever you decide to do, I'm right here with you." He gently placed his hand over her growing belly. "But maybe take a break from the phone." Mia's fingers hovered over the keyboard. "If I speak out, it could affect my position on the bench. If I stay silent..." She trailed off, watching another share notification pop up. Across town, Frank Daniels sat in his dimly lit living room, his face illuminated by his phone screen. Comment after comment condemned his actions. "Police brutality. Racist cop. Fire him now." His jaw clenched as he read each one, his certainty from yesterday crumbling into confusion and defensiveness. With a frustrated grunt, he jabbed the power button, plunging his screen into darkness. Outside the police station, a crowd gathered. Signs bobbed above heads. "Protect black women. No one is above the law, not even police." The morning sun cast long shadows as the group grew larger, their chants echoing off the building's brick facade. Mia's phone buzzed with an incoming call. Judge Harriet Lawson's name flashed on the screen. Mia answered, her mentor's familiar voice bringing unexpected tears to her eyes. "Stand strong, Mia," Judge Lawson said firmly. "We're not letting this one slide." The evening news cast blue shadows across Lisa's face as she sat rigid on their worn leather couch. The TV anchor's voice filled their modest living room. The arrest of Judge Mia Bennett continues to spark outrage across social media. Frank pushed through the front door, his shoulders slumped under the weight of his suspension. The floorboards creaked beneath his heavy steps as he hung his jacket by the door, avoiding Lisa's gaze. "We need to talk about this, Frank," Lisa said, her voice tight with emotion. She muted the TV but left the images playing silently. "Not now, Lisa. I've had a rough day." Frank moved toward the kitchen, but Lisa stood up, blocking his path. "Our son was profiled last month. Or did you forget?" Her words stopped him cold. A white officer stopped Michael while he was walking home from band practice, made him empty his backpack right there on the sidewalk. Frank's jaw clenched. "That's different." "How?" Lisa's eyes flashed. "Because it's our son. Because you know he's a good kid. That woman you arrested is a judge, Frank. She's pregnant. What made you so sure she was a threat?" Upstairs, Michael's fingers paused on his game controller as his parents' voices carried through the floor. He remembered the humiliation of that day, how his hands had trembled as he pulled his sheet music from his backpack while neighbors watched from their windows. "I was following protocol," Frank insisted, but his voice lacked conviction. "She was being difficult." "Was she? Or were you?" Lisa worked with families in crisis every day at the community center. "I've seen this before, Frank. Good people letting their biases cloud their judgment." Frank's face flushed red. "You're making this about race." "Because it is," Lisa's voice cracked. "Look me in the eye and tell me you would have treated a pregnant white woman the same way." The silence that followed was deafening. Frank turned away, grabbed his beer from the fridge, and retreated to the garage. Sitting in his old camping chair, he pulled out his wallet and stared at a family photo from Michael's middle school graduation. His son's smile was so bright that day. "When did it all get so complicated?" he muttered to himself, taking a long sip of his beer. Sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows, casting warm patterns on the marble countertop where David stood whisking eggs. The gentle sizzle of butter in the pan filled the quiet morning air. At the table, Mia sat motionless, her untouched plate of whole wheat toast growing cold. "Honey, you need to eat something." David said softly, sliding a perfect omelet onto her plate. For the baby, if nothing else. Mia nodded absently, her fingers tracing the rim of her water glass. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, evidence of another restless night. I just keep replaying it in my head, she whispered. David pulled up a chair beside her, his warm hand covering hers. I know it's hard, but we've got that appointment with Dr. Carter in an hour. We should get ready. I don't know if I can face going out there, Mia admitted, her voice cracking slightly. Everyone's probably seen that video by now. Then let me drive you, David insisted gently. You shouldn't miss this appointment. At the clinic, Dr. Carter's familiar face creased with concern as she checked Mia's blood pressure. This is higher than I'd like to see, she said, removing the cuff. Have you been experiencing any headaches? Mia nodded, tears welling in her eyes. Everything's just so overwhelming right now. I saw what happened, Dr. Carter said quietly, pulling up a chair. But right now, my primary concern is you and this baby. Stress can be dangerous during pregnancy. I feel torn, Mia confessed, her hands protectively cradling her belly. Part of me wants to fight back, to speak up, but another part just wants to protect my baby and stay out of the spotlight. Back home that evening, Mia paced their living room. I feel so powerless, she burst out, like I'm letting everyone down by not doing more. David caught her hands in his, steadying her. You're one of the strongest people I know, he said firmly. Whatever you decide to do, I'm right here with you. Her phone buzzed with a text from Sarah Carter. Community rally tomorrow. Would mean so much if you'd speak. No pressure. We support you either way. Mia stared at the message, her heart pounding as she typed her response. I'll be there. The evening air hummed with energy as hundreds gathered in Cedar Park. String lights twinkled overhead like stars, while scattered candles created pools of warm light throughout the crowd. Hand-painted signs bobbed above the sea of faces. Justice for Mia. End police bias. Black Lives Matter. And protect our community. David's hand rested protectively on Mia's lower back as they approached the gathering. Her heart pounded, but she kept her chin high, drawing strength from the gentle kick of her baby. Sarah Carter spotted them first, rushing over with a bright smile. Judge Bennett, thank you so much for coming, Sarah said, wrapping Mia in a careful hug. The turnout is amazing. There must be at least 300 people here. James joined them, clipboard in hand. Everything's ready whenever you feel comfortable speaking. He gestured toward a small platform decorated with fairy lights. The crowd parted as Mia walked through, many reaching out to touch her shoulder or murmur words of support. We're with you, Judge Bennett, called out an elderly woman. Stay strong, sister, said another. Sarah took the microphone first, her voice clear and passionate. Tonight, we welcome Judge Mia Bennett, who has shown incredible courage in the face of injustice. As Mia stepped onto the platform, shouts erupted from the far edge of the park. A group of about 20 people waved thin blue-line flags, their angry voices carrying across the space. Back the blue, they chanted. Law and order. David tensed beside her, but Mia squeezed his hand and approached the microphone. The main crowd fell silent, though the counter-protesters continued their chants. 2 days ago, Mia began, her voice steady despite her racing heart, I was humiliated and arrested while simply trying to attend a prenatal appointment. But my story isn't unique. It's one that plays out every day in communities across America. Go back to your courtroom, a male voice shouted from the counter-protest group. James immediately moved toward the disruption, his hands raised in a peaceful gesture. Several police officers stationed at the edges of the park also stepped forward, creating a human barrier between the groups. Mia continued, her voice growing stronger. This isn't about one officer or one incident. This is about a system that needs to change. We deserve better. Our children deserve better. She rested her hand on her belly. This baby deserves better. The crowd erupted in applause and cheers, drowning out the opposition. Tears glistened in many eyes, and phones recorded every word. When she finished speaking, the gathering pressed forward, their faces shining with hope and determination. As David guided her back to their car afterward, person after person stopped to thank her. An African-American mother with 2 young daughters hugged her tight. "Thank you for speaking up," she whispered. "Thank you for showing my girls what courage looks like." In the car, Mia slumped against the seat, emotionally drained. David started the engine, watching her with concern. "I can't stop now," Mia said quietly, meeting his eyes. "This fight is bigger than me." Sunlight streamed through the tall windows of the New Haven Community Center, casting long rectangles of light across the worn linoleum floor. Frank Daniels stood in the doorway, his police uniform replaced by jeans and a plain blue shirt. His fingers fidgeted with his car keys as he scanned the room. 8 folding chairs formed a circle in the center of the space. Most were already occupied by people Frank would normally only encounter during his patrols. Maria Vega, wearing a professional blazer over a purple blouse, gestured warmly toward an empty chair. "Welcome, Officer Daniels. Please join us." Frank's jaw tightened as he took the seat, keeping his back straight and stiff. The metal chair felt cold and uncomfortable beneath him. "Let's begin by setting some ground rules," Maria said, her voice gentle but firm. "We're here to listen and share without judgment. Everyone's experience is valid, and we treat each other with respect." Frank couldn't help but roll his eyes. He crossed his arms over his chest, creating a barrier between himself and the group. A young black man in pressed khakis and a polo shirt cleared his throat. "I'm Noah Grant," he began, his voice steady, "and I think it's important that Officer Daniels knows why I'm here." Frank's gaze snapped to Noah's face, recognition dawning. "A year ago, you pulled me over in front of Marshall Elementary. My 8-year-old daughter was in the car." Noah's hands clasped together tightly. "You made me get out, put my hands on the hood. My little girl watched through the window, crying, while you searched my car for 20 minutes. "I was following," Frank started. "Protocol?" Noah finished. "That's what you said then, too. But here's my question, Officer Daniels. If your son was watching, would you have treated me the same way?" The question landed like a punch to Frank's gut. He opened his mouth to defend himself, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he found himself picturing Michael's face, imagining his son watching such a scene unfold. As others began sharing their stories, a grandmother detained while walking home from church, a teenager questioned for sitting in his own car. Frank felt his certainty crumbling. Each account chipped away at the wall he'd built around himself. When the session ended, Frank walked slowly to his car in the parking lot. He sat behind the wheel, but didn't start the engine. Noah's words echoed in his mind. "Would you have treated me the same way?" The question followed him like a shadow he couldn't shake. The afternoon sun cast a warm glow through the bay windows of Judge Harriet Lawson's study, illuminating decades of legal texts lining the mahogany shelves. Mia Bennett sat in a plush armchair, her hands wrapped around a delicate china teacup. The familiar scent of Earl Grey tea and old books brought a small measure of comfort. Harriet Lawson, elegant in her sage green cardigan, watched Mia with keen eyes that hadn't lost their sharpness after 40 years on the bench. "Tell me what's really on your mind, dear," she said, her voice carrying the soft lilt of her Georgia upbringing. Mia set down her cup, the china clinking softly against its saucer. "I feel lost, Harriet." The rally was powerful, but what happens next? Words and protests aren't enough anymore. They never were, Harriet replied, leaning forward. But they're a start. What we need is systemic change, and you're in a unique position to push for it. But how? Mia's hand absently touched her growing belly. I'm just one judge. Harriet's laugh was warm but pointed. Just one judge? Child, do you know how many lives one judge can touch? One judge with courage can move mountains. The older woman stood, walking to her desk where she pulled out a thick folder. Remember the Wilson case from '82? One ruling changed how this entire state handles juvenile cases. She placed the folder in Mia's hands. You have something Frank Daniels and his ilk don't have. You understand both sides of the bench. Mia opened the folder, scanning the yellowed pages. You're suggesting I draft legislation? I'm suggesting you do what you do best. Create a framework for accountability. Harriet sat back down, her eyes sparkling. Think about it. A civilian oversight committee, real consequences for misconduct, mandatory bias training with teeth. As Harriet spoke, Mia felt something shift inside her, a spark of possibility igniting. She reached for her tablet in her purse and began taking notes. We'd need community representation, clear guidelines for investigations. Now you're thinking like a change maker. Harriet smiled, pouring more tea. Use your position, use your voice, make them listen. Later that evening, Mia sat at her home office desk, surrounded by research papers and legal precedents. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, crafting the first draft of what she hoped would become a blueprint for real change. Each word she typed felt like a step toward the future she wanted for her child. A future where justice wasn't just a word in a law book, but a living, breathing reality. The morning light filtered through the dusty blinds of the community center, casting long shadows across the worn linoleum floor. Frank Daniels shifted uncomfortably in his plastic chair, feeling out of place without his uniform. The small waiting area buzzed with quiet conversation and the occasional cry of a baby. Lisa moved with practiced ease among her clients, her gentle smile and warm words creating an atmosphere of trust. Frank watched as she knelt beside a young mother who clutched a stack of papers with trembling hands. We'll figure this out together, Maria, Lisa assured her, pointing to various resources on the eviction notice. There are emergency funds available, and I know some lawyers who can help pro bono. Frank's attention drifted to a small boy, maybe 7 or 8, sitting alone in the corner. The child's sneakers were scuffed, his jacket a size too small, but he seemed lost in his own world as he pushed a battered toy car back and forth across the armrest. Something about the boy's careful, controlled movements reminded Frank of Michael at that age. This is my husband, Frank, Lisa said, introducing him to a group of regulars. Their polite nods couldn't mask the way some of them instinctively drew back, eyes darting to the door. Oh, Frank recognized that look. He'd seen it countless times during traffic stops and domestic calls, but now it made his stomach twist. A young man in his 20s, wearing a neat button-down shirt and name tag from a local grocery store, cleared his throat. I remember you, Officer Daniels. You pulled me over last summer, accused me of stealing my own car. His voice was steady, but his hands were clasped tightly in his lap. Do you know how long it took for my little brother to stop having nightmares? He was in the back seat. Frank opened his mouth to defend himself. Protocol, suspicious behavior, standard procedures. But the words died in his throat. He thought of Michael, of how he'd react if someone treated his son that way. The drive home was heavy with silence. Frank stared out the window, seeing his reflection overlaid on the passing houses and trees. When Lisa pulled into their driveway, she turned off the engine, but didn't move to get out. Maybe it's time to apologize, she said softly. To Mia, to yourself, to the people you've hurt. Frank nodded, his throat tight with unspoken words. The soft glow of Mia's laptop screen cast shadows across her face as she sat curled up on her living room couch, a throw blanket draped loosely over her legs. Her fingers trembled slightly as she scrolled through another hateful comment thread, each new message making her stomach clench tighter. The warm, familiar space that usually brought her comfort felt suffocating tonight, despite the gentle hum of the heating system and the familiar family photos lining the walls. Just another entitled judge who thinks she's above the law, one comment read, the words seeming to leap off the screen. Mia's chest tightened as she read another. She's probably making it all up for attention. The venom in their words stung like physical blows. The words blurred together as tears welled in her eyes, making the harsh blue light of the screen dance and shimmer. She placed a protective hand over her belly, feeling the gentle movement of her baby within, a reminder of what truly mattered. The cruel messages seemed to mock everything she stood for: her integrity, her dedication to justice, her very identity as both a judge and a black woman. A notification popped up with a sharp ping. Maybe if she hadn't been so argumentative, none of this would have happened. Mia's breath caught in her throat, the air suddenly too thick to breathe. She pressed her hands to her face, trying to hold back the flood of emotions threatening to overwhelm her, her wedding ring cool against her heated cheek. That's how David found her when he walked in, hunched over, shoulders shaking with silent sobs, looking smaller than he'd ever seen her. Without a word, he settled beside her on the couch and wrapped his strong arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. The familiar scent of his cologne provided an anchor in her storm of emotions, bringing with it memories of safer, happier moments. I can't do this anymore, Mia whispered, her voice breaking like thin ice. Every time I think I'm making progress, these people, they just tear everything down. They make me doubt everything I've worked for, everything I believe in. David gently closed her laptop and set it aside, the sharp click of the lid seeming final and decisive. Talk to me, love, he murmured, his thumb drawing soothing circles on her shoulder. I feel like I'm failing everyone, Mia admitted, finally looking up at him with red-rimmed eyes, her usual confidence nowhere to be found in her tear-stained face. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead in the community center as Frank shifted uncomfortably in his metal folding chair. The circle of participants seemed smaller today, more intimate, which only added to his unease. His police uniform felt stiff and constraining, a constant reminder of why he was here. The familiar scent of coffee and stale donuts from the refreshment table did nothing to settle his churning stomach. Maria Vega, the facilitator, stood at the center, her gentle smile doing little to calm the nervous energy in the room. Her silver-rimmed glasses caught the harsh lighting as she looked around at their faces, pausing briefly on each person as if reading their readiness to participate. Today, Maria began, her voice warm and encouraging, we're going to dig deeper into personal experiences. These conversations might be difficult, but they're how we grow together. Who would like to share first? She clasped her hands in front of her, patient and steady, like someone who had guided countless others through similar moments of vulnerability. Noah Grant's hand rose slowly but deliberately, like a flag being raised at half-mast. Frank's jaw clenched at the sight, his fingers drumming an anxious rhythm against his thigh as he braced himself for what was coming. The familiar tightness in his chest returned, the same feeling he'd had every week since these sessions began. Sunlight streamed through the windows of Mia's home office, casting warm patches on the scattered legal books and handwritten notes covering her desk. She reached for her steaming cup of chamomile tea, hoping it would calm her racing thoughts. Her laptop screen glowed with half-finished paragraphs of her police oversight proposal, but her eyes kept drifting to her phone. "Mia, honey." David's gentle voice came from the doorway. His face was etched with concern as he held up his tablet. "You might want to see this." Her stomach tightened as she read the headline. Police records cast doubt on Judge Bennett's account. Below it, a local news anchor dissected supposed inconsistencies in her story, citing anonymous sources within the department. "They're saying I exaggerated?" Mia's voice cracked slightly. "They have the video. Everyone saw what happened." David pulled up a chair beside her, scrolling through social media. Hashtags like "Calling Judge Bennett," "Lied," competed with "Domshirshner Stand with Mia." Some posts questioned how she could serve as a judge if she couldn't respect law enforcement. Others defended her, sharing their own stories of similar encounters. "This is exactly what they want," Mia said, pushing back from her desk. "To make me doubt myself, to make others doubt me." She pressed her hands against her temples, fighting back tears of frustration. David squeezed her shoulder. "Then don't let them win. Tell your truth." Mia straightened in her chair and opened a new document. Her fingers flew across the keyboard as she crafted her statement, her voice growing stronger with each word. She detailed the events of that night, her commitment to justice, and her vision for meaningful change. "I stand by my account of these events," she wrote. "As a judge, I've dedicated my life to upholding truth and justice. As a mother-to-be, I fight for a future where no one faces discrimination under the guise of law enforcement." When she published the statement that evening, support poured in immediately. Civil rights attorneys praised her courage. Community leaders shared her words. Local activists organized online campaigns to combat the misinformation. Sitting on their living room couch later that night, Mia scrolled through messages from people sharing how her story had touched them. A young law student thanked her for showing that speaking up was worth the risk. A mother expressed gratitude for fighting for their children's future. She turned to David, her eyes bright with renewed purpose. "This is why I can't stop now." The courthouse buzzed with tension as cameras flashed and reporters whispered among themselves. The historic marble walls seemed to amplify every sound, from the shuffle of feet to the rustle of papers. Mia sat straight-backed at the plaintiff's table, her dark blazer crisp and professional, one hand resting protectively over her growing belly. Despite her composed exterior, her heart raced beneath her calm facade. Across the aisle, Frank fidgeted with his tie, his suit looking slightly too big on his frame. Dark circles under his eyes revealed sleepless nights, and his usual confidence had been replaced by visible unease. He kept glancing at Mia, then quickly looking away. Judge Victoria Caldwell entered, her presence commanding immediate silence. "All rise," the bailiff called out, and the packed courtroom rose as one. After the initial proceedings, Mia's attorney presented their case methodically, laying out the evidence of racial profiling and misconduct. The video footage from that day played on the courtroom screens, causing a ripple of murmurs through the crowd. When Frank took the stand, his hands trembled slightly as he placed them on the railing. His voice was rough with emotion as he began to speak. "I want to acknowledge my actions that day," he said, his eyes meeting Mia's directly for the first time. "I let my biases control my behavior. I treated Judge Bennett differently because of her race, and I've spent months working to understand why." Frank described his journey since the incident, the sensitivity training sessions, the conversations with Noah, the eye-opening experiences at his wife's workplace. His voice cracked as he addressed Mia directly. "I am deeply sorry for what I put you through. My actions weren't just wrong. They were harmful to you, your baby, and our entire community. I can't undo what I did, but I'm committed to doing better." Whispers erupted throughout the courtroom. Some nodded approvingly at Frank's candor, while others crossed their arms skeptically. Mia sat perfectly still, her expression unreadable as she absorbed Frank's words. Judge Caldwell called for order, then announced a recess. As people began filing out, Mia stood slowly, feeling the weight of both her pregnancy and the moment. She walked toward the courthouse doors, her mind churning with conflicting emotions. Frank's words had seemed genuine, but could they erase the humiliation and fear she'd experienced? As a judge herself, she believed in the power of rehabilitation, but as the victim, the path to forgiveness felt far more complicated. The evening shadows stretched across Mia's living room as she sank into the plush couch, her body heavy with exhaustion from the day's grueling court proceedings. Papers and legal books were scattered across the coffee table, sticky notes poking out from various pages, a testament to her relentless work ethic and dedication to justice. "Sweetheart, you need to rest," David said softly, his warm hands gently squeezing her tense shoulders. The worry lines around his eyes deepened as he watched his wife push herself beyond her limits. "The proposal can wait until tomorrow." Mia shook her head, reaching for her laptop with trembling fingers. "I'm so close, David. Just a few more sections to polish." Her fingers moved tiredly across the keyboard, but her usual sharp focus was clouded by fatigue. The words on the screen blurred together, forcing her to blink repeatedly to clear her vision. David brought her a steaming cup of chamomile tea, placing it carefully beside her on a cork coaster. The soothing aroma of honey and herbs filled the air. "At least drink this. You've barely eaten all day. I'm worried about you." The clock ticked past midnight as Mia continued working, her eyes growing heavy and shoulders hunched. Suddenly, a sharp pain shot through her abdomen, making her gasp and clutch at her swollen belly. The laptop slid from her knees as she doubled over, knocking against the edge of the coffee table. "Mia?" David was at her side instantly, his face etched with concern, one hand supporting her back, while the other grabbed her trembling fingers. "What's wrong?" "Something's not right," she whispered, clutching her stomach as another wave of pain hit, more intense than the first. "The baby. David, it hurts." David didn't hesitate. He grabbed her hospital bag from the hallway closet and helped her to the car, his hands steady despite his racing heart. The drive to the hospital was a blur of streetlights and worry, with David breaking speed limits while keeping one reassuring hand on Mia's knee. In the emergency room, doctors moved quickly, their voices urgent but professional. Words like fetal distress and emergency C-section floated around Mia as monitors beeped steadily in the background. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across the concerned faces of the medical team. When Mia opened her eyes hours later, the hospital room was dim and quiet, except for the gentle hum of medical equipment. David sat beside her bed, his hand wrapped around hers, his wedding ring cool against her skin. "Hope?" she croaked, her throat dry and scratchy from the breathing tube. "She's in the NICU," David said, his voice thick with emotion, dark circles under his eyes betraying his sleepless night. "She's stable, but they want to monitor her closely. She's fighting hard, just like her mama." Tears welled in Mia's eyes as guilt crashed over her like a wave. "I should have listened to you. I pushed too hard and I almost—" Her voice cracked with the weight of what could have happened. "Shh," David soothed, wiping her tears with his thumb. His touch was gentle, forgiving. "Do you want to see her?" In the NICU, David wheeled Mia to their daughter's incubator. Hope was tiny but perfect, her little chest rising and falling steadily beneath the soft yellow hospital blanket. Through the clear plastic, Mia pressed her hand close to her daughter's form, counting each precious breath. "Hope," she whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. Fog forming on the incubator where her words met the plastic. "You're my reason to keep fighting. I promise to do better, to be better, for you." Frank's footsteps echoed through the precinct's hallway as he walked in that morning, his shoulders tense under the weight of hostile stares. The familiar scent of coffee and paper filled the air, mingling with the sharp tang of floor cleaner. But everything felt different now. Officers who once greeted him warmly turned their backs or whispered behind cupped hands. A few rookie officers watched the scene unfold with uncertain expressions, clearly torn between old loyalties and new revelations. Bradley Carter stood by the break room, his arms crossed and jaw clenched, coffee cup abandoned on the counter behind him. "Well, look who it is. The department's very own Judas," he sneered, loud enough for everyone to hear. His badge gleamed under the fluorescent lights, a reminder of the authority he still wielded. Frank took a deep breath, steadying himself against the tide of tension. "I need to talk to you, Bradley. In private." His fingers unconsciously brushed against his own badge, a gesture he'd developed over 20 years of service. "Whatever you've got to say, you can say it right here," Bradley shot back, his voice dripping with contempt. He shifted his weight, deliberately taking up more space in the hallway. "Fine. Did you leak that report about Judge Bennett?" Frank's voice was firm, his eyes locked on Bradley's face, searching for any telltale sign of guilt. Bradley laughed, a harsh sound that drew attention from nearby officers who pretended to shuffle papers while eavesdropping. "You've got some nerve, Frank. First, you throw us all under the bus, and now you're playing detective? What's next? Gonna write a book about police corruption?" "This isn't about taking sides," Frank said, his voice steady despite his racing heart. Sweat dampened the back of his collar. "It's about doing what's right. That report was confidential, and you know it." "What's right?" Bradley stepped closer, his face reddening, veins visible on his neck. "You're a sellout, Frank. 20 years on the force, and now you're buddy-buddy with the same people who want to destroy everything we stand for. You used to understand what this badge meant." Frank stood his ground, feeling the weight of every eye in the precinct. "No, Bradley. What destroys us is refusing to change, refusing to admit when we're wrong. We're supposed to protect and serve everyone, not just the people who look like us. That badge means protecting all citizens, not just some of them." Leaving Bradley fuming, Frank walked to Captain Reynolds' office, his footsteps measured and deliberate. His hands trembled slightly as he placed his retirement papers on her desk, the forms crisp and white against the dark wood. "Are you sure about this, Frank?" Reynolds asked, studying his face with concern etched in the lines around her eyes. "There's still a place for good officers here." "Yes, Captain. I need to do more than just acknowledge my mistakes. I want to help fix things. Sometimes you have to step away to make real change." As Frank walked out of the station one last time, he felt lighter somehow. The badge he'd carried for 2 decades no longer weighed heavy on his chest. The morning sun warmed his face as he pulled out his phone and dialed Noah's number, ready to take the next step in his journey toward making things right. The precinct door closed behind him with a final click, marking the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. Sunlight streamed through the hospital room window, casting warm patterns across Mia's bed. The cheerful array of flowers and balloons brightened the sterile space, their colors a stark contrast to the white walls. Mia sat propped up against her pillows, looking tired but peaceful as she cradled a cup of water in her hands. David stood by the window, adjusting a fresh bouquet when a gentle knock drew their attention. Judge Harriet Lawson entered, her silver hair neatly styled and a manila folder tucked under her arm. "My dear," Harriet said warmly, approaching Mia's bedside. "You gave us quite a scare." "Harriet," Mia smiled, reaching out to squeeze her mentor's hand. "I'm so glad you're here." Harriet pulled up a chair and settled beside the bed. She placed the folder on Mia's lap. "I brought something I thought you might want to see." Mia opened the folder to find her proposal draft, printed and organized with Harriet's familiar sticky notes marking various sections. Her fingers traced the pages she'd worked so hard on. "You've laid an excellent foundation here," Harriet said softly. "But there's no rush to finish it now. Your health and your baby need to come first." David moved closer, placing a gentle hand on Mia's shoulder. "She's right, honey. You don't have to carry everything at once." Tears welled in Mia's eyes. "I just feel like I'm letting everyone down if I don't keep pushing forward." "Listen to me." Harriet leaned forward, her voice firm but kind. "Justice doesn't require martyrs. It needs strong, healthy advocates who can fight the long fight. Take the time you need to heal, to bond with your beautiful daughter. The work will still be there." David nodded in agreement. "One step at a time, love. That's all anyone can ask of you." Mia dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. "You're both right. I think I need to write something to my supporters. Let them know I'm not giving up, just taking time to get stronger." Later that evening, with David by her side, Mia began drafting her letter. Her words flowed naturally, filled with gratitude and hope. As she wrote, she felt a weight lifting from her shoulders, replaced by a quiet determination to continue her fight, but this time on her own terms. The early morning sun filtered through the hospital room's blinds, casting gentle stripes of warmth across Mia's bed. She stirred slowly, wincing at the dull ache from her C-section. David sat in the chair beside her, his hand resting protectively near hers, his presence a quiet comfort in the sterile room. "Good morning," he whispered, noticing her eyes flutter open. "How are you feeling?" Before Mia could answer, Nurse Clara Morales entered with quiet efficiency, her shoes making soft squeaks against the linoleum floor. Her kind face broke into a warm smile as she approached the bed. "Good morning, Judge Bennett," Clara said, checking the monitors. "Your vitals are looking good today. And I have wonderful news about little Hope. She's maintaining her temperature beautifully, and her breathing has stabilized overnight." Mia felt tears prick at her eyes. "When can I see her?" "We can arrange a visit right now if you're feeling up to it," Clara offered, helping Mia sit up slowly. "Just remember to take it easy." David brought over a wheelchair, and together with Clara they helped Mia settle into it. The short journey to the NICU felt like miles, each movement reminding Mia of her surgery. But when they arrived at Hope's incubator, everything else faded away. There she was, so tiny, yet so perfect. Her dark curls peeked out from beneath her tiny cap, and her chest rose and fell with steady breaths. Mia pressed her hand against the clear wall of the incubator, wishing she could hold her daughter. "Hi, baby girl," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Mommy's here. I promise you, Hope, I'm going to make this world better for you. I won't stop fighting until it's safer and fairer for everyone." David squeezed her shoulder, and Mia covered his hand with hers, drawing strength from his steady presence. Later, back in her room, Mia asked David for her tablet. Despite his concerned look, he handed it over. She opened a blank document and began typing. "Dear friends and supporters, these past few days have taught me more about strength, justice, and love than I ever imagined possible. As I recover and watch my daughter grow stronger each day, I am reminded why our fight for equality matters so much." She paused, considering her next words carefully. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about Hope, and all the children who deserved a better future. Frank stood before his open locker, methodically emptying its contents into a cardboard box. The familiar sounds of the police station, ringing phones, shuffling papers, and murmured conversations felt different now, more distant, almost like echoes from another life. He carefully removed his spare uniform, folding it with practiced precision, his fingers lingering on the badge that had defined him for so many years. The metal felt cold against his skin, a stark reminder of all that had changed. Well, if it isn't Officer Turncoat, Bradley Carter's voice cut through the quiet. He leaned against the nearby lockers, arms crossed, a sneer twisting his face. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across his features, making his expression even more menacing. His jaw clenched tight with barely contained anger. "Quite the performance you gave in court. Bet you're feeling real righteous now." Frank continued packing, trying to ignore the jab. His hands trembled slightly as he placed his worn police manual in the box, its dog-eared pages testament to years of service. The weight of 2 decades on the force seemed to press down on his shoulders. He noticed the coffee stains on some pages, remnants of countless late nights studying procedures he'd once believed were always right. "Nothing to say?" Bradley pushed off the lockers, stepping closer, his boots squeaking against the polished floor. The sound echoed in the tense space between them. "You threw every cop in this precinct under the bus with your little confession. Real proud of yourself, aren't you? Making us all look like monsters to save your conscience." Frank finally turned to face him, squaring his shoulders despite the weariness in his bones. The familiar ache in his lower back reminded him of all the long shifts, all the choices that had led to this moment. "I told the truth, Bradley. That's what we're supposed to do, remember? It's right there in the oath we took." "The truth?" Bradley scoffed, his face reddening. A vein pulsed at his temple as he jabbed a finger toward Frank's chest. "You got soft. Forgot which side you're on. Started listening to those protesters instead of your brothers in blue." "There shouldn't be sides," Frank replied firmly, his voice steady despite his racing heart. The words felt right, even as they cost him everything he'd known. We're supposed to protect and serve everyone, not just the people who look like us. That badge means something more than just protecting our own. "Captain." David sat on the edge of Mia's hospital bed, his tablet balanced on his knee as he scrolled through the morning news. Sunlight filtered through the blinds, casting warm stripes across the sterile white sheets. The gentle hum of medical equipment provided a steady backdrop to the peaceful morning scene. "Frank Daniels officially retired yesterday," David said softly, turning the tablet so Mia could see the headlines. "There was quite a scene at the station. The whole department showed up." Mia shifted carefully, mindful of her C-section stitches, and took the tablet. The top story showed Frank cleaning out his locker, while Officer Bradley Carter stood in the background, clearly angry. Several other officers clustered nearby, their expressions ranging from respectful to disapproving. "The community's divided," David continued, gesturing to the comments section. "Some people are calling him brave for admitting his mistakes and stepping down. Others think it's just damage control. The local news stations have been covering it nonstop since yesterday afternoon." Mia scrolled through the responses, her expression thoughtful. Her fingers traced the screen as she read comment after comment. "What about that meeting with Noah Grant?" she asked, remembering the young father from the sensitivity training sessions. She'd been particularly moved by his story during the workshops. "They met at the Daily Grind this morning," David replied. "Here's a photo someone posted. They were there for quite a while, actually." The image showed Frank and Noah sitting across from each other at a small cafe table. Frank looked nervous but earnest, while Noah's posture was guarded yet attentive. 2 untouched coffee cups sat between them, steam still rising from the ceramic mugs. Noah was hesitant at first, David explained. He questioned whether Frank was genuine or just trying to save face. But after talking for over an hour, Noah agreed to help Frank understand the community's perspective better. They're planning to meet again next week. Mia set down the tablet and glanced at the photo of Hope on her bedside table. Their tiny daughter was getting stronger each day in the NICU, her fighting spirit evident in every milestone. The nurses had just sent a new picture this morning of Hope gripping one of their fingers. "What do you think?" David asked gently, following her gaze to Hope's photo. His voice was warm with concern and love. "I think," Mia paused, choosing her words carefully, "I think change has to start somewhere. Whether Frank is sincere or not, his actions are forcing people to talk about these issues. And that's something we desperately need." The morning news continued playing softly in the background as they watched footage of Frank and Noah shaking hands outside the cafe, an unexpected symbol of possible progress. A small crowd had gathered to witness the moment. "Maybe this is the beginning of real change," David suggested, squeezing Mia's hand. His touch was warm and reassuring, as always. Mia looked again at Hope's photo, her heart full of determination. "For her sake," she said quietly, "I hope so. She deserves to grow up in a better world than this." The afternoon sun cast a warm glow through the hospital room window, highlighting the colorful array of flowers and balloons that filled every available surface. Get well cards lined the windowsill, their messages of support providing a constant reminder of the community standing behind Mia. The sweet scent of lilies mingled with the sterile hospital air, creating an atmosphere of healing and hope. Judge Harriet Lawson knocked softly before entering, her familiar presence bringing comfort to the room. She carried a worn leather briefcase and wore a determined smile, her eyes twinkling with the energy that had made her such a formidable force in the legal community for decades. "How are you feeling today, dear?" Harriet asked, settling into the chair beside Mia's bed. She reached out and patted Mia's hand with maternal affection. "Stronger," Mia replied, carefully adjusting her position against the crisp white pillows. "The doctors say I'm healing well. The pain is more manageable now." David sat on the other side of the bed, his laptop open as he showed Mia the latest photos from the NICU. "Hope gained another ounce today," he said proudly, pointing to their daughter's tiny face on the screen. His finger traced the outline of her delicate features. Harriet pulled out a marked-up copy of Mia's proposal, the pages covered in neat red annotations. "I've reviewed your draft thoroughly," she said, her reading glasses perched on her nose. "The framework is solid, but I have a few suggestions to make it more effective. Your instincts are spot on." For the next hour, they worked through the document together, the steady beeping of hospital monitors providing a quiet backdrop to their discussion. Harriet pointed out areas where the language could be stronger and suggested additional oversight measures that had proven successful in other jurisdictions. Her decades of experience shone through in every suggestion. "The key is making it practical while maintaining its teeth," Harriet explained, highlighting a particular section with her yellow marker. "We want reform that will actually be implemented, not just look good on paper. Too many good proposals die in committee because they're not actionable." Mia nodded, making notes on her laptop as David watched proudly. Her fingers moved swiftly across the keyboard as she incorporated Harriet's suggestions, carefully rewording sections to ensure clarity and impact. Despite her fatigue, her eyes remained sharp and focused. "This civilian oversight committee needs real power," Mia insisted, typing quickly, her voice gaining strength with conviction. "Not just the ability to make recommendations, but actual authority to hold officers accountable. We can't afford another toothless tiger." David showed her another photo of Hope, this one capturing their daughter's tiny hand, gripping the nurse's finger. The image showed every perfect detail of those miniature fingernails. Mia paused her typing, touched by the image, her eyes growing misty. "This is why we're doing this," she said softly, touching the screen. "For her future. For all the children who deserve better." By early evening, the proposal was complete. Mia carefully crafted an email to her network of supporters, attaching the final document. Her finger hovered over the send button for just a moment before clicking decisively. The quiet click seemed to echo with possibility. Looking up at David and Harriet, she smiled. "This is just the beginning," she whispered, feeling a surge of hope for the changes to come. The setting sun painted the room in shades of gold, as if nature itself was blessing their endeavor. Frank shifted uncomfortably in his folding chair, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. The community center's fluorescent lights hummed overhead as the circle of about 20 people settled into their seats. The smell of coffee wafted from the back table, but Frank's stomach was too knotted to think about refreshments. Noah Grant stood at the center of the circle, his presence commanding yet gentle. "Thank you all for coming today," he began. "This is a safe space to share your experiences and feelings about law enforcement in our community." One by one, people began to speak. A middle-aged woman described being followed in stores by police officers. An elderly man recounted how his grandson was roughly handled during a traffic stop. A teenager shared how he took longer routes home from school to avoid police patrols. Frank felt each story like a physical weight on his shoulders. He recognized some of the behaviors they described, things he'd done himself, actions he'd dismissed as procedure or protocol. "Would you like to share your thoughts, Frank?" Noah's voice was encouraging, but neutral. Frank cleared his throat, his voice rougher than he expected. I've been on the force for 20 years, he started. And sitting here today, I'm realizing how much harm I've caused. Things I justified. He paused, swallowing hard. I wrongfully arrested Judge Bennett. But that wasn't an isolated incident. I've been part of the problem for a long time. The room fell silent. Several people leaned forward, studying him with a mix of surprise and skepticism. "I can't undo what I've done," Frank continued. "But I'm here because I want to understand. I want to do better." A few people nodded slowly. Others crossed their arms, their expressions guarded. After the session ended, a young man approached Frank. "I'm Darius," he said, extending his hand. "What you said in there, it took guts. We need more officers willing to admit when they're wrong." Frank shook his hand, noting the strength in Darius's grip. "Thank you," he replied quietly. "I've got a lot to learn." As he walked to his car afterward, the morning sun warm on his face, Frank replayed the stories he'd heard. Each one represented a breach of trust, a failure of the system he'd been part of for so long. The weight of it was heavy, but for the first time, it felt like a weight worth carrying. The autumn breeze rustled through the trees as David carefully helped Mia from the passenger seat. She winced slightly, her C-section incision still tender. Baby Hope slept peacefully in her car seat, bundled in a soft pink blanket. "Take it slow, honey," David murmured, supporting Mia's elbow as they made their way up the front walk. Their house came into view, and Mia's eyes welled with tears. A cheerful, "Welcome home, Bennett family" banner stretched across the front porch, surrounded by colorful balloons and flowers. Several neighbors stood on their own lawns, waving and calling out gentle greetings. "Oh my goodness," Mia whispered, touched by the display of community support. Inside, the house smelled of fresh flowers and home-cooked meals. Oh, the kitchen counter was lined with covered dishes and care packages, each tagged with notes of encouragement. David settled Hope into her bassinet, while Mia eased herself onto the living room couch. Throughout the afternoon, a steady stream of visitors stopped by. Sarah Carter brought a homemade lasagna and baby clothes. Judge Harriet dropped off a stack of children's books. Each visitor kept their stay brief, mindful of Mia's need to rest. "The community's really rallied around you," David observed, bringing Mia a cup of herbal tea. Mia nodded, glancing at her laptop where the draft agenda for the upcoming public forum waited. "I just hope I can live up to their expectations." "Hey," David said softly, sitting beside her. "One thing at a time. Right now, you need to focus on healing and bonding with Hope." As if on cue, Hope began to fuss. David brought her to Mia, who cradled their daughter close. Looking down at Hope's peaceful face, Mia felt the familiar mix of love and determination surge through her. That evening, after most visitors had gone, Mia sat in the nursery's rocking chair, reviewing the forum agenda on her phone while Hope nursed. David leaned against the doorframe, watching them with concern. "You know, the community will understand if you need more time," he suggested gently. "I know," Mia replied, stroking Hope's cheek. "But this work can't wait. These changes are too important." David knelt beside the rocking chair. "Then let us help. You don't have to carry this alone." Mia looked down at Hope, now sleeping contentedly in her arms. "I promise I'll make this world better for you," she whispered, pressing a soft kiss to her daughter's forehead. Mia stood at the podium, her heart pounding beneath her crisp navy blazer. The community center auditorium was packed, every seat filled with faces both familiar and unknown, their expressions a mix of hope and uncertainty. The overhead lights felt warm on her skin as she adjusted the microphone, taking a deep breath to steady herself. "Good evening," she began, her voice steady despite her nerves. "We're here tonight because we believe in the possibility of change, real, lasting change that can transform our community." As she outlined her proposal for civilian oversight, Mia could feel the energy in the room shift. Some nodded in agreement, leaning forward in their seats, while others crossed their arms, their skepticism evident in their furrowed brows. She detailed the three-tier system of accountability, emphasizing transparency and community involvement, her hands moving with purpose as she explained each point. "This isn't about punishment," she explained, making eye contact with different sections of the audience. "It's about building trust and ensuring justice for all. We need to create a system where everyone feels heard and protected." From the back of the room, a police union representative stood up, his face stern and shoulders rigid. "With all due respect, Judge Bennett, this proposal undermines police authority. How can officers do their jobs effectively with civilians second-guessing their every move? We're trained professionals who make split-second decisions." Before Mia could respond, movement caught her eye. Frank Daniels rose from his seat, his expression determined, his police badge still pinned to his jacket after his shift. "If I may," he said, his voice carrying across the hushed room. "I spent 20 years on the force thinking exactly like that. But I was wrong." He paused, gathering his thoughts, his hands gripping the chair in front of him. "My encounter with Judge Bennett opened my eyes to my own biases. The oversight she's proposing isn't about undermining authority. It's about making us better officers, better servants of our community. We need this change." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Several heads turned to stare at Frank, recognizing him from the viral video. His words seemed to carry extra weight coming from someone who had been on the other side, and the tension in the room noticeably softened. After the forum, community members gathered around Mia, offering support and suggestions, their enthusiasm evident in their animated conversations. As she packed up her materials, organizing her papers with trembling fingers, Frank approached her podium. "Thank you," Mia said softly, genuine gratitude in her eyes. Frank shook his head, a gentle smile crossing his weathered face. It's the least I can do. We're in this together now." The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Frank and Lisa's backyard. The smell of grilled burgers and hot dogs wafted through the air as small groups of people gathered around folding tables decorated with checkered tablecloths. Police officers in civilian clothes stood awkwardly on one side, while community members clustered on the other, creating an invisible line down the middle of the yard. Frank wiped his sweaty palms on his jeans, then cleared his throat. "Everyone, please help yourselves to the food," he called out, gesturing toward the buffet table. Lisa squeezed his hand supportively before moving to chat with a young mother who stood alone near the fence. Officer Rodriguez, still in his rookie year, cautiously approached a group of community members. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, holding his paper plate. After a moment's hesitation, they made space for him. Across the yard, Noah Grant engaged in an intense but measured conversation with Sergeant Thompson. "It's not about blaming individual officers," Noah explained. "It's about acknowledging the fear that exists in our community." The tension in the air began to dissolve as people filled their plates and found themselves sharing tables. The casual setting made it easier to see each other as neighbors rather than adversaries. When Mia arrived carrying Baby Hope in her car seat, conversations paused. She looked tired but happy, and Hope's presence seemed to soften everyone's expressions. Even the most heated discussions quieted as people gathered to coo over the sleeping infant. "She's beautiful," Officer Martinez said, smiling at Hope. "Makes you remember what really matters, doesn't it?" Mia nodded, sharing a meaningful look with Frank across the yard. "She's why we're all here," she replied, "to make things better for her generation." As the evening progressed, phone numbers were exchanged, and plans for coffee meetups were made. Officer Rodriguez and Mr. Johnson, a local teacher, discovered they both coached youth basketball and began planning a friendly game between their teams. When the last guest departed, Frank and Lisa collected empty plates and cups in comfortable silence. They settled onto their patio swing, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. "Did you see Thompson talking with Noah?" Lisa asked, leaning against her husband's shoulder. Frank nodded, a small smile playing at his lips. "This feels like the first real step toward change." Mia rubbed her temples as she stared at her laptop screen, the harsh glare reflecting off her face in the dim morning light. Rain pattered against the windows of her living room, matching her gloomy mood. Another email notification popped up. Another setback. "Here's your chamomile," David said softly, placing a steaming cup beside her. "How's it going?" Mia sighed heavily. "The police union is pushing back hard. They're calling my proposal anti-police and claiming it would undermine officer morale." She clicked through another email. "And Councilman Hale just sent a long list of concerns about implementation costs." David pulled up a chair beside her, his presence steady and comforting. "What exactly did Hale say?" He basically parroted the union's talking points. "Says civilian oversight would create unnecessary bureaucracy and hurt police effectiveness." Mia's voice cracked slightly. "Maybe I'm being naive. Maybe this is too big to tackle." "Hey," David said firmly, taking her hand. "Remember all those people at the community forum? They believe in you. This was never going to be easy, but you're not alone in this fight." Mia squeezed his hand, then reached for her phone. After a brief hesitation, she dialed Judge Lawson's number. "Harriet, I could really use your advice right now." The older woman's voice was warm but firm. "Let me guess. They're pushing back hard?" "Yes. I'm starting to wonder if I'm in over my head." "Listen to me, Mia. Every meaningful reform in history faced resistance. That's how you know you're onto something important. Stand firm. This is exactly when they hope you'll give up." Just as Mia was hanging up, there was a knock at the door. David opened it to reveal Noah and Frank standing on the porch, both slightly damp from the rain. "Sorry to drop by unannounced," Noah said, "but we heard about the union's pushback. We want to help." Frank nodded earnestly. "I know some council members personally, and Noah has connections with community organizations that can rally support. We can fight this together." Mia felt a small spark of hope ignite in her chest as she looked at these unlikely allies standing in her living room, ready to join her battle. The marble halls of City Hall echoed with footsteps as Mia straightened her blazer, taking a deep breath. Frank and Noah stood beside her, their presence both surprising and comforting. Through the large windows, morning sunlight cast long shadows across the polished floor. "Ready?" Noah asked, adjusting his tie. Mia nodded, clutching her presentation folder. "As I'll ever be." Their first meeting was with Councilwoman Peters, who listened attentively as Mia laid out statistics and success stories from other cities. Frank's contribution came naturally, his voice steady but humble. "I was that officer," he admitted, meeting the councilwoman's gaze. "The one who thought he was just doing his job, following protocol. But I was wrong. My biases hurt people, good people like Judge Bennett. Without proper oversight, those mistakes keep happening." The morning progressed with back-to-back meetings. Some council members were receptive, others skeptical. But it was their meeting with Councilman Hale that proved most challenging. "This is excessive regulation," Hale insisted, leaning back in his chair. "Our officers need support, not more red tape." Noah leaned forward. "With respect, Councilman, I've spent months collecting testimonials from our community. People want to trust the police, but that trust has to be earned. This isn't about punishment. It's about building bridges." Mia pulled up slides showing successful oversight programs. "Look at these numbers from Sacramento," she pointed out. "Civilian complaints dropped by 40% within a year of implementing similar measures. Officer satisfaction actually improved." "And as a former officer," Frank added, "I can tell you, good cops welcome accountability. It protects them, too." Hale's expression softened slightly. "You really believe this will help, Frank? Not just create more paperwork?" "I know it will," Frank replied firmly, "because I've seen both sides now." By day's end, they had met with 7 council members. Most showed cautious interest, taking notes and asking thoughtful questions. Even Hale had requested additional information about implementation costs. As they walked out of City Hall together, Mia felt lighter despite her exhaustion. "I can't thank you both enough for today," she said, turning to Frank and Noah. "We're in this together," Frank replied simply. The city council chamber buzzed with nervous energy as people filled every available seat, with dozens more standing along the walls. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, catching dust motes and golden beams that painted diagonal stripes across the worn wooden floor. Mia sat between David and Frank in the front row, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, knuckles white with tension. Baby Hope was safely at home with Lisa's mother, allowing both Lisa and Frank to attend this crucial meeting that could change their community forever. Council President Martinez called the meeting to order, her gavel echoing through the packed chamber like a thunderclap. "Today we vote on Proposal 2749, establishing a civilian oversight committee for police conduct," she announced, her voice clear and steady, carrying to every corner of the room. Mia's heart pounded as community members approached the podium one by one, each sharing their story. Sarah Carter, who had recorded Mia's arrest, spoke passionately about witnessing injustice firsthand, her phone footage playing silently on the chamber's screens. Others shared similar stories, their voices trembling with emotion, but filled with hope for change, their words painting pictures of both pain and possibility. When Police Union Representative Johnson took the stand, tension crackled through the room like static electricity. "This proposal will handicap our officers," he argued, his face flushed and voice rising. "It will make them hesitate in critical moments, putting lives at risk. We cannot afford to second-guess split-second decisions." Noah squeezed Frank's shoulder as murmurs rippled through the crowd like waves. Mia felt David's hand find hers, his touch anchoring her as the council began their deliberations, their faces serious and thoughtful. Councilman Hale cleared his throat, adjusting his microphone with trembling fingers. The room fell silent, every breath held in anticipation. "I'll be honest," he began. "I came into this process deeply skeptical." He paused, looking directly at Frank, his expression softening. "But hearing Officer Daniels speak about his own journey of accountability, well, it made me realize that oversight isn't about punishment. It's about growth, about building trust between our officers and the community they serve." The council's voting buttons lit up one by one, each soft chime echoing in the hushed chamber. Mia held her breath, counting silently, her grip on David's hand tightening with each vote. When the final tally appeared on the screen, 7 in favor, 4 against, the chamber erupted in cheers and applause, the sound washing over them like a cleansing wave. Tears welled in Mia's eyes as David pulled her into a tight embrace, his arms strong and secure around her. Frank and Noah joined them, their faces glowing with triumph and relief. Through happy tears, Mia whispered, "We did it. We really did it." The warm glow of string lights illuminated Mia's backyard as laughter and conversation filled the evening air. The scent of David's famous grilled chicken and Lisa's homemade mac and cheese wafted through the open patio doors. Inside, Baby Hope slept peacefully in her bassinet, surrounded by the gentle hum of celebration. Mia stood in her kitchen, taking in the scene before her. Judge Harriet Lawson chatted with Noah by the fireplace, while Frank and Lisa helped David arrange desserts on the dining room table. The sight of former adversaries now working together as friends brought tears to her eyes. Judge Lawson clinked her glass with a spoon, drawing everyone's attention. "I'd like to propose a toast," she began, her voice carrying decades of wisdom. "To Mia Bennett, a beacon of hope in our community. Your courage hasn't just changed laws, it's changed hearts." The room erupted in warm applause as Mia blushed, squeezing David's hand. Frank stepped forward, his expression earnest. "I need to say something too," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Lisa stood beside him, offering silent support. "Mia, your forgiveness gave me a chance to become a better person," Frank continued. "You could have chosen bitterness, but instead, you chose to fight for change. That meant everything." Several guests shared their own stories. A young mother described how Mia's stance had inspired her to speak up at her workplace. A local teacher explained how he used Mia's example to teach his students about civic engagement. As the conversations flowed, Mia slipped outside for a moment of quiet reflection. The night air was cool and crisp, and stars twinkled overhead. She thought about the long journey from that terrible traffic stop to this moment of triumph. David joined her, wrapping a warm blanket around her shoulders. "Penny, for your thoughts?" he asked softly. "I'm thinking about hope," Mia replied, leaning into his embrace. "About the world we're building for her." "A better world," David affirmed. "One where she'll know her voice matters." "And one where she'll understand that change is possible," Mia added, "even when it seems impossible." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the stars. Inside, Baby Hope's soft coos drew them back to the gathering. Mia lifted her daughter gently, cradling her close. "This is just the beginning," she whispered, pressing a soft kiss to Hope's forehead. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows of the city council meeting room, casting a warm glow on the polished oak table and creating dancing shadows on the pale cream walls. Mia Bennett adjusted her navy blazer and smoothed a wrinkle from her pencil skirt before looking around at the diverse faces of the committee members seated before her. The room buzzed with quiet anticipation and nervous energy as she called the first meeting of the Civilian Oversight Committee to order. "Thank you all for being here today," Mia began, her voice steady and clear, carrying to every corner of the room. "This committee represents a new chapter for our community, one that I believe will help heal old wounds and build bridges." Frank Daniels sat 3 seats down, wearing a crisp button-down shirt instead of his former police uniform. His shoulders seemed lighter without the weight of his badge. He nodded encouragingly as Mia outlined the committee's objectives, his fingers tapping thoughtfully against his notepad. "Our first order of business," Mia continued, squaring her shoulders, "is reviewing recent cases of alleged misconduct." She distributed folders containing detailed reports, watching as committee members began studying them intently, some reaching for their reading glasses, while others immediately started highlighting key passages. Dr. Sarah Martinez, a civil rights attorney with 20 years of experience, raised her hand. Her silver-streaked hair caught the sunlight as she spoke. "These patterns are concerning. We need better tracking systems in place to identify issues before they escalate." "If I may," Frank spoke up, his voice humble but assured, his hands clasped together on the table. "From my experience on the force, officers often lack proper de-escalation training. We could start there. I've seen too many situations spiral out of control that didn't have to." Reverend James Thompson, a respected community leader with deep roots in the neighborhood, leaned forward in his chair, his kind eyes serious. "How do we ensure accountability while maintaining officer morale? We need both to create lasting change." Frank shared stories from his years of service, pointing out specific instances where better oversight could have prevented incidents. His candid admissions, spoken without defensiveness, drew thoughtful nods from around the table. A few committee members jotted down notes as he spoke. Mia presented her proposal for a youth mentorship program inspired by Frank's work with NOAA. Her eyes lit up with passion as she explained, "By connecting officers with local youth, we can build trust early and create lasting change. We've already seen success with pilot programs in other districts." The committee members engaged in productive discussion, with social workers, legal experts, and community activists each contributing unique perspectives. The conversation flowed naturally as they established clear guidelines for investigating complaints and created a timeline for implementing new training protocols. Ideas bounced back and forth across the table like a well-choreographed dance. As the meeting progressed, Mia felt a surge of pride watching former adversaries work together toward common goals. The tension that had filled previous community meetings was replaced by a spirit of collaboration. When she caught Frank's eye across the table, they shared a knowing smile, a quiet acknowledgement of how far they'd come and the distance they still had to travel together. "These are excellent first steps," Mia concluded as the meeting drew to a close, gathering her papers with steady hands. "Let's reconvene next week to begin implementing these initiatives. We have a lot of work ahead, but I'm confident we're on the right path." The room filled with the sounds of chairs scraping and papers shuffling as committee members gathered their belongings, chatting animatedly about their plans. Several lingered to continue their discussions in small groups, their voices mixing with the late afternoon sunlight that still streamed through the windows. The afternoon sun bathed the city park in golden light as hundreds of people gathered before the stage. Colorful banners fluttered in the gentle breeze, their messages of accountability, unity, progress, drawing approving nods from the diverse crowd. Children played on the grass while their parents set up lawn chairs and blankets, creating a festival-like atmosphere. Mia Bennett stood at the edge of the stage, taking deep breaths to calm her nerves. David squeezed her hand reassuringly as she prepared to address the crowd. The microphone crackled to life as she stepped forward, her blue dress catching the sunlight. "Thank you all for being here today," Mia began, her voice clear and strong. "When I was wrongfully arrested just months ago, I never imagined that moment would lead to such powerful change." She touched her stomach, remembering the fear she'd felt that day. "But thanks to every one of you, we've turned a moment of injustice into a movement for progress." The crowd erupted in applause, and Mia spotted familiar faces. Judge Harriet Lawson beaming proudly, Sarah and James Carter holding up their phones to record, Lisa Daniels wiping away tears. Frank Daniels approached the microphone next, his shoulders straight, but his expression humble. "I stand before you today not as the officer I once was, but as someone who has learned the hard way about the importance of accountability." His voice cracked slightly. "Thank you for giving me the chance to make things right." The audience fell silent, hanging on his every word as he described his journey from defensive officer to community advocate. When he finished, the crowd rose to their feet, their applause thunderous and sustained. Noah Grant bounded onto the stage with characteristic energy, raising his hands to rally the crowd. "This is what change looks like," he called out. "But our work isn't done. We need every one of you to stay involved, to keep pushing for progress." The crowd responded with enthusiastic cheers, many holding up signs showing their support for the Oversight Committee. The atmosphere was electric, with possibility and hope. As the speeches concluded, local musicians took the stage, filling the park with upbeat rhythms. The aroma of grilled food wafted from food trucks parked nearby, and people began mingling, sharing stories and plans for future involvement. Mia stood at the edge of the stage, cradling baby Hope in her arms. The crowd below began to chant, "Hope for the future! Hope for the future!" The sound swelled through the park, and Mia felt tears of joy prick her eyes as she waved to the gathered community. The soft glow of Mia's desk lamp cast a warm circle around her as she settled into her favorite writing spot. The house was peaceful, with only the gentle hum of the baby monitor breaking the silence. She picked up her favorite pen, its familiar weight comforting in her hand, and pulled out a fresh sheet of paper. "My dearest Hope," she wrote, her handwriting flowing across the page. Tears welled in her eyes as she continued, "Before you were born, I experienced something that changed not just my life, but our entire community. It taught me about strength, forgiveness, and the power of standing up for what's right." Mia paused, touching her pen to her lips as she gathered her thoughts. The memory of those challenging days felt both distant and incredibly fresh. She glanced at the framed photo on her desk, a picture of her holding Hope for the first time in the hospital. "Your very existence gave me the courage to keep fighting," she wrote. "Even when things seemed impossible, thinking of you reminded me why this work matters so much." David's footsteps approached quietly, and she felt his gentle hand on her shoulder. He leaned down, reading the words she had written, and squeezed her shoulder supportively. "When you're older," Mia continued writing, "I want you to know that change is possible. I've seen it happen. I've watched hearts transform and bridges build between people who once stood divided. Your mother helped make that happen, but I couldn't have done it alone." The baby monitor caught a soft coo from Hope's room. Mia and David exchanged warm smiles before heading to the nursery together. They stood over Hope's crib, watching their daughter sleep peacefully. "I promise you this," Mia whispered, reaching down to stroke Hope's cheek. "I will never stop working to make this world better for you. You've given me the strength to change the world. For you, I will keep going." David wrapped his arm around her waist as she leaned down to kiss Hope's forehead. If you enjoyed the story of the Mia, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.